So good morning, everybody. Everyone knows that this is our last week of class. So by the end of the week, by the end of Friday, you need to have turned in all of your assignments, namely from the very first assignment that was given to you to prepare an image for the web in JPEG, GIF, and PNG formats. We have 3 websites that we did this semester. We did the Wix, we did the MobiRise, and you should be finishing up your Dreamweaver website. We also have 2 sets of lessons that you've published and turned in. One was lesson 7, which was a accumulation of lessons 1 through 7. And then either lesson 11 or 12, which leaves off from lesson 7. We work on lesson 8, 9, and 10, as well as 11 and 12. So if you publish a lesson 11, that's okay, or 12. But you don't need to publish each individual lesson, just they're kind of like the good breaking points for each of them for what we're working on with the lessons. Before I talk about designing for web accessibility again, I talked about it last Thursday for about 20 minutes, but I wanted to go over things in a little bit more detail today, just because it is important that most instances when you design websites, they do need to be accessible to people with disabilities. Not in every instance. It's more difficult when you're designing for people in the arts, because most of the websites that we design are for, people who are visually oriented. And one of the major disabilities that we have to take into consideration are people who are seeing impaired. So before I go over these points, this is designing for web accessibility. And this is done on the, taken from the W3C. Okay, so if I go home, this is what the home page looks like, making the web accessible. Okay. And then if I come back over here, and it looks like I went back, and now I don't know that I can go back again. Let's go back again. And this is designing for web accessibility. So if you grope around a little bit, you can find this. But before I get started with this, do any of you have any questions that you want to ask before too long that I can touch on? Or does anybody need assistance? Or do you want me to help afterwards? Okay. Okay, so first things first then. Let's talk about this one here. There's a whole list of bullet points, designing for web accessibility, that you need to take into consideration. And we have talked about all of these. The first is providing sufficient contrast between foreground and background. If you click on this link, you can see the examples that they provided, that there is inadequate contrast ratio in the one to the left. And even on my website, I like a lighter typeface. I don't like everything black. So this, for somebody who is visually impaired, and I don't think my site is all that good, but it is easier to read when you have black on white versus gray on white. So the more information that they provided down here is this is the contrast minimum. And you can have also work with color blindness, and you can how to check your contrast ratio. Well, I've talked about that myself, that if we go to my website, okay, that one of the things that we can do, if I click right here, I got to make sure that I can get back to some of these. If we go back to my website, and one of the things that you can do to check for contrast ratios is go to Juicy Studio. Okay. So that brings us up here. Now, by default, what they have is the black and white. Black or white background. Foreground color is generally refers to text. Okay, so you put in the hexadecimal number. So let's put in, we'll leave the background color white, and we're going to put in another one. I'm going to put in 060, which is a color that we've used in our website, or that we've been designing. So I'm going to calculate the contrast ratio and see what pops up. Let's see if it works. Analyze the contrast. So let me put in, let's try that again. So I'm going to refresh and do it again. Oh, no, it's still working on it. It's just that it's very slow at the moment. I didn't realize that. I'm looking up here at the browser, and I don't know why it's taking so long for it to do that. It usually pops up pretty quickly. Okay. And this basically reinforces or reiterates what the W3C has done. But anyway, we don't need to wait for this. Again, put in the hexadecimal number that can be found in Dreamweaver, or if you're working in Photoshop or Illustrator, use the web-safe colors, and they will give you the hexadecimal numbers for each of them. Let me go ahead and try this one more time. Let me go ahead and let's cancel that. Let me go ahead and refresh. And let's go ahead and check the luminosity for this. Let's see if it pops up. There we go. So by using 060, you can see that for large sample, it works, and for regular, it works. Okay, so it passed with a AAA rating. That was 000, so I goofed. Let's go back. That's just black and white. That's a standard. So let's go back to 060. Okay, now let's try that again. And you can see that it has that bluish green. And here's the results. And again, it gives us a triple rating. It's very good for the chosen colors. So that's all you have to do. Okay, so that's the contrast. And that's very important because a number of people like to have dark backgrounds, maybe work with a black background, but then you need to be careful with the color of your text. If you use anything other than white, even if you use a light blue, if you use reds, those can be very difficult for the type. So that may not be your best choice. So I'm going to go back to W3C again. Okay, so that's for insufficient backgrounds. So that's a good one to pick. Another one is you don't want to use color alone to convey color information. So the examples that they name here, okay, is that, for example, under the color only, notice that required fields are in red. Well, that may not work for people with color blindness. What it needs to be is that required fields are in red and marked maybe with an asterisk, and they can see the asterisk by reading it. Another example would be here, that if you have color only for these shapes, and you're going to ask the person which colors are green and blue and red and yellow, and you don't know, you may want to also assign a numeral, numeric value with each of those shapes. And again, that will detect for color blindness. Now, one of the things that I talked about last week is that if we go to, there are useful websites that allow you to see what photographs that you use are going to look like with color blindness. So if I go back here again to my website and we look at ColoBlender, okay, it's ColoBlender, that's it. If we go back here again, we select that. And I'm going to drag one of the images that I have in here. Okay, so if I scroll down here and it says new release of color blindness simulator, and that's what you want right here. So this is the sample image that they have, but you'll also notice that there is a place for us to be able to click and drag. Now, if I click, it says drag and drop your file right here. It's kind of small. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I need to find my image. I had the one of my dog, and it's here someplace where, oh, it's in a folder. Let me just use another one here. Let's go ahead and use this image of me. And that's a JPEG. So I'm going to go back. So I found an image that we can use. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on that image and drag it right here. Okay. So here's the image of me sitting in front of my screen. Okay. And if I zoom out a little bit, whoops, I didn't want to do that. My mistake. Let me go back here again. I didn't want to do that. So let me go back. Okay. So let's zoom out a little bit. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted to go back here. So it's waiting for the image. You know what? I'm going to go back. So let's go back again to my website. Let's go to Cold Blender. Let's select here this, and I'm going to go ahead and click on here instead rather than drag. So if I just click on here to select a file, that's what I want to do. There, choose file. So I need to go to my desktop and find the image that I just placed in there. Where is my, I'm going to go into bagel images. There we go. We'll just do that. And here's my JPEG for the my dog. So this is what bagel looks like under normal trichromatic viewing. So nice photograph. But if you want to see what it looks like with anomalous trichromacy, so here's red weak. When you click on that, it looks a little different. When you look at green weak, so you can see that the reds really are not showing up that well when it's that way. And here's another one with blue weak. And then you can also look at the dichromatic viewer. Red blindness, green blindness, and they look considerably different. Okay, and you can also look at it in a monochromatic view. So it will allow you to see what a person's going to see with color blindness. And that can be prove to be very, very helpful. Okie doke. So there we have that. So let's go back to that. That allows for color blindness. So let's go back again. And let's check another one out. So ensure that interactive elements are easy to identify. And I have been criticized about mine. So generally you want to make sure that you have on a mouse over, that maybe you can change the color of your text. Maybe it can also have the underscore when you hover over it. Anytime you hover over the text or the image that is a link to something else, it will give you that finger, okay? But you want to make sure that it's fairly easy to see. And I know that on my website, links are not always easy to see. You know, I have an underscore, but it's fairly light. And when you hover over it, then it changes to that salmon color to let you know that there is a link there. So it's subtle, but it is consistent. So that's something that you want to take into consideration for links. Okay, ensure that the interactive elements are easy to identify. And I admit mine are fairly subtle, but they're meant for a fairly sophisticated design audience, not with people with disabilities. So I will be perfectly honest and upfront about that. But you may not have that as an option for you. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have also provide clear and consistent navigation options. So when I click on there, make sure that, for example, and this is something that we added for your contact. Make sure, for example, it says your email goes here, your website goes here. You know, if you have a phone number, whatever are comments, they go there. Make sure that they are adequately labeled. You also want to make sure, and I'll point back to my website again, that your navigation is clearly labeled. That's why we generally put it at the top. So it's the first thing that people see. And one of the things that we can do, and I did not do that with my website, but we did with the one that we designed, is that we locked it to the top so that even when you scroll your website, your navigation bar remains intact. Now, one of the ones that I did with mine, that if we look at this one here, that I created in MobiRise, but we also did this in Dreamweaver as well, is that it is locked and the navigation is locked and frozen to the top. So if I scroll down, you can see that the background now changes to black with white on top of it for the text, but the navigation remains intact. So it's easy for the viewer to find. They don't have to hunt for it, that it should be, and it also is that it should be consistent. You don't want your navigation to be in a different place on a different page. You want it to be in the same place, the same color, the same appearance, consistent on each and every page. And then you have the choice whether you want it to be, I'm gonna redo that. Let's go back here. Let's go back to the top. That, it looks a little different here, but it's pretty clear that it's the same. Okay. So navigation, especially elements for input, make sure that they are consistent and that they are the same on every page. So links, navigation, okay. Form elements, we also, we just did that. So the forms that we had added right here, make sure that they're adequately labeled so that they know what they're supposed to be putting. And if you just copy and paste the one that I used on my website, that will be adequate for you. And if you wish to style it a little bit differently, that's fine. But again, notice that I put inside, you will want your name, email, and comment. I could add something if I wanted a telephone number, if I wanted your, but I thought also in the comments, if you feel like giving me your telephone number, you can put that there. If you want to put in your web address, you could put that there. So there's adequate information in here, at least to get the ball rolling with regard to contact, but they're all properly labeled. So that's important. Okay, so we can go back again. Let's go back to the W3C. And scroll back up here. So provide easily identifiable feedback. And that was what we just did with forms. Okay. So in some cases, if it's important that they have to fill out these areas, it's done with a simple checkbox in the properties panel with Dreamweaver. And on MobiRise, to be perfectly honest, I've forgotten if it's required what you check, but I'm sure that can be done. Okay, so that these are properly labeled, that they have to be added. Okay, and oftentimes, even if they aren't properly added, if you don't fill it out, it will kick it back. It won't go through. So that's important. Okay, so just some of the things that you should be considering. Use headings and spacing to group related content. We've done that throughout our websites. Okay, remember I talked about that the other day? That you make sure that you use your heading tags properly and use in the proper syntax. Okay. Also, you'll notice here that over to the left, this example where there's very little spacing. Remember how I've said throughout the semester that, add margins, add padding to give adequate spacing around the text, around your images, so that it's relatively easy for the viewer to see and read the content. So that's very important. It's also important regarding the headings that you reserve your H1 tags for the most important elements on your page. Typically, there is one that is the most important. There could be two, possibly. But then after that, you're going to use probably H2, H3, and maybe an H4 tag. I rarely use anything smaller than an H3. So most of, aside from a paragraph tags are the smallest elements usually on your page. But H6 tags can be very, very small if you're not careful. But remember, when we've stylized our pages, that sizes can be changed. Okay, an H2 tag can be larger than an H1 if you want it to be. That's not recommended, but it is possible to style it that way. So what I recommend is that you keep it in that order, that whatever you have as an H1 tag is probably the largest element and the most dominant element on the page. And then likewise with H2 through H6, that they get successively smaller and also are the less important elements on your page. Okay, so that's something to consider. So that follows through with that. Next, create designs for different viewport sizes. That's also something that we have done. We have made it responsive so that when you go back in, okay, it looks different on, if I go back to my website, it works. It doesn't matter what page we're on. Okay, so if I go to my About page, for example, this is what it looks like on a large screen. But what does it look like? Whoops, I clicked on the wrong thing here. Let's go back here. There we go. It looks fine on a large screen, but what does it look like on a smaller screen? And eventually, when it gets on a small tablet or on a phone, it's designed responsively. Now, that's something that is, I will say, fairly recent in web design. This was not always the case. But this is something that I have adhered to, and what I like about with the 2017 version is because it definitely set up designing websites for various screen sizes and made it responsive and incorporated Bootstrap to do that. So I recommend that you all do that as well. So that's an important element. Okay, so that's designed for different screen sizes. If you don't do that, then typically what it's going to do, especially on a smartphone, and that's where most people view websites now, is on their smartphone, is that it will just shrink it down in size, and it may not be work with a touchpad. And by incorporating Bootstrap elements, when you scale it down for tablets and smartphones, that it will adapt to touchpads. And for a large screen, you can use a mouse. Okay, so using the elements that we've added to our style sheet throughout Dreamweaver are really good reference points for working with web pages that are responsive to different sizes. Okay, so we're getting through these pretty quickly. Include alt tags. I also talked about that. So if I bring up, Let me go ahead and bring up my Dreamweaver page. And let's switch to my layout. Not that one. Let's go to the About page. There we go. So alt tags, what are alt tags? Alt tags are used anytime you use an image that a person who is seeing impaired will not see that image. They will have images turned off. So what you want to do is to give them a reference to let them know what is being seen. So if I click on this image here, you can see that image is being viewed, that in the properties panel down here under alt, you'll notice that I wrote woman at market. If you want it at open air market or something, you know, shopping for groceries, whatever. So that's it tells the person who is seeing impaired exactly what it is that they can't see. If there is really, really important information for the person to know about, and that the image is not adequate and you want to give more important information, you can always provide a link to a page, a text page, an HTML page that will give the viewer, I call them the viewer, the reader, something more concrete to have access to, okay? So for every single image that you have on your website, you generally need an alt tag. And I know, for example, having the faculty show here at Cerritos College, when I submitted the work, the 3 images for my work, I had to also include alt tags because Cerritos College, as well as other colleges and universities and schools, are very particular about making sure that their website is ADA compliant, that it complies with the American Disability Act. Okay, so those are alt tags, and those are a must. I have not emphasized with your websites that they be, you know, that you include alt tags, because I figured it's enough for you to make sure that your website is functioning. But it's something that if you plan on continuing to use your website as your personal website, that you do. You go back and make those changes. In addition to that, if you provide videos on your website, you need to make sure that there is closed captioning. Now, I provide links to my YouTube videos, which is where this will be shortly. But in YouTube does that automatically. They will provide closed captioning for you. I know during my summer class, last summer, I had a person who was hearing impaired and needed a signer for them. And so I recorded the signer. They were online and visible, just like I am right here. And they were signing during the video or during the webinar, and it was recorded onto the video. So that's something that you need to do as well. Now, you'll notice that for each of these, and I have been going over these, you know, but in avoiding some of them, notice that they have tutorials, for example, you know, how to do this. And it goes on and on and on, you know, CSS font, CSS transforms, HTML, you know, on this page, all of these things that you need to be concerned about. Now, for your personal website, maybe not so much. Okay. Let's go back to tutorials home. And let's go back to, that's the overview. And I got to find where I was again. Hold on here. Let's go back. There we go. So we're back to where I was. It's really easy to get lost because there are hundreds, if not thousands of pages on W3C. And we're just covering the areas pertaining to making sure that your website is ADA compliant, okay? So last one. Provide controls for content that start automatically. And that generally applies to video. And it also, that is what we included for the wow slider. That if you don't want your slideshow to start automatically, then you don't. You can always, that feature can be turned off, but remember on mine, it's an option that it starts automatically. So if I go back over here, let's go to Kirk's classes and scroll up and notice that it automatically goes from one to the next. So I have an automatic start feature on here. You don't have to include that, but notice that when you hover over it, I have the options to pause that. And you can go forward, or you can go backwards, or you can go to any particular slide you want. I'm putting the interactivity, the responsiveness in the use of the viewer's hands. And then if they want to play it again automatically, they just click the start button and then they roll off of it and it will automatically go through the slideshow again. So that's something that's very important that you want to include as well. Again, for people with disabilities or just to make it a friendlier user experience, I think. Okay. So that's all of those. Those are a good starting point for all of us. There's another one that I have for you as well, that if we go to my website and we go to Kirk's classes and we go to either handouts or weekly syllabi, it doesn't really matter. And you scroll down, I have ancillary lectures. And what I have for you is web best practices, and it's a slideshow. And I will admit these were the people who designed this several years ago. This goes back to 2007, yeah, a long time ago. And most of these hold true today. There are a few things that have changed, but for the most part, these are some of the considerations that you still need to factor in when designing your website. So the first thing that you always need to take into consideration is appealing to your target audience. Who is your target audience? If it is, other art directors, photographers, designers, people in the art industry, and art business of some sort, galleries or whatever, then your standards are going to be different. Then you probably are going to want to ignore some of the things that make it ADA compliant. It's going to be graphically rich. You're going to focus on images. And even though you may add alt tags, it's not going to really help people who are seeing impaired. Okay. But on the other hand, if you are selling items to people, like back in the day, Beanie Babies or something like that were very popular. And you want to appeal to an audience in middle America who maybe doesn't have a fast internet connection, then you want to make sure that your website uses small images or fast loading images, if you do have any images at all, to make sure that their pages will load quickly with a slow internet connection. The other is consistent site header and logo. That's something that we've emphasized, and that's where we have the navigation and where we have our logo. Right now, the popular choice is just simply put it at the top. Same with consistent navigation area. You don't want that to change from page to page. Your information page or your index page should have a title, should include a company name, organization, site name, things like that. The footer of the page should have copyright. If it's important for you to have contact with the web developer, then you would want an email address. And if content is critical, when that content was added. You want to also note when it was last updated. Okay. Now, this is something that has changed. Displays without horizontal scrolling used to be 800 by 600 pixels. It's much different now. It's 1200 minimum, sometimes even up to 2,000 pixels wide by 1200 pixels deep. So that's changed a lot over the years, going from very small screens to large. But now we're dealing with responsive websites. So the next would be your page layout, balance of text and graphics and white space. Is there adequate, are there adequate margins? Are there adequate padding? Okay. Make sure that there's good contrast between text and the background. Again, see, all these things have not changed. The repetitive information, your header, logo, and navigation, they really shouldn't take up more than 1/4 to 1/3 of the browser page. Okay, so it should be very small. But in some instances, people like it, your home page can take up much more. That is also, your home page can be called your splash page, something that grabs the viewer's attention. The navigation through your website should be compelling. It should be easily accessible. But it really doesn't need too much. It just maybe needs a basic image, and that's it. This still holds true that your homepage should be able to download within 10 seconds. But that's on a phone connection. Okay. Now, not many people have phone connections anymore. Most people have T1 lines, or they have, it's through the cable, but it's equivalent to a T1 connection. So, but that is important. Again, if your target audience has a phone connection, then you're going to want to minimize images and their size, make sure that they're properly compressed so that they download quickly. And again, if you use Dreamweaver, or you use other tools like Dreamweaver in Photoshop, we looked at the images and we used Save for Web resources, that it will give you the download time for that. The other thing that we haven't talked much about, and it isn't too much of an issue anymore, is browser compatibility. So it used to be the case that Internet Explorer was the browser of choice. That has changed. They have really fallen behind the times. Netscape no longer exists. Mozilla is really Firefox is one of the dominant open source web browsers right now, and that would be one to consider. Safari still is there, and the one that isn't here is Google Chrome. So we have, as I said, this is an old slideshow, but most of it is still relevant, but a few things are not. A few things have changed. Opera still exists, but is kind of in the background. So you need to consider Firefox, which is Mozilla, Safari, and Chrome. Not only do you want to check your website on current browsers, but on older versions as well to make sure that they're reading properly. So typically, if you're doing this for yourself and you have time after the semester is over, or if especially if you're going to design a website for a client, you want to make sure that you take the time to view the website on different browsers and different versions of those browsers to make sure that everything reads clearly. Okay. This is something that we talked about just a little bit earlier. This has not changed. Main navigation links need to be clearly labeled. Okay. And so that's either there's an underline, or that you have a hover state, or a combination of the two, and that it's easily accessible for your target audience. Flash images are no longer used anymore, so you don't need to worry about that. If an image is used for navigation, I don't recommend that you do that anymore. That used to be the case, that images were used for really to create some of the three-dimensional properties that we have now with CSS3. So you don't need to use that anymore. Navigational aids such as sitemaps or breadcrumbs, you can still use that. They aren't necessary really pretty much anymore. One of the things that you should consider though with navigation is that, and I have mentioned this once or twice during the semester, but I will mention again, is that that any page on your website should be accessible within 3 clicks of the user's mouse. And that's still pretty much true today. So if you need to incorporate drop-down menus to get to a particular place on your website for quicker accessibility, that would be okay. But also now that if you link your navigation bar to the top of your web page, or that it's pretty consistent, you should be able to go anywhere pretty quickly. So that's important. Color and graphics. It's a good idea is to maintain kind of a constraint that you use consistent colors, but different colors for backgrounds and text. Make sure that on any page, there's no more than maybe 3 or 4 colors that you use to really kind of minimize your palette, unless color is important to you. And that's a part of what you're trying to communicate, then that might be a little bit different. But in most cases, limit the use of your colors. Make sure that you use colors consistently. Make sure that color is good, has good contrast with the associated text. If there is color effect using it. This has not changed. Color should not be used alone to convey meaning. And that's an accessibility issue. Remember, that's something that we just went over. And you want to make sure too that color and graphics enhance the website rather than distract from it. It's basic design principles. What is it that you are focusing on any given page? Is it the content? Is it the text, or is it the images that you want the person to focus on? And that will determine the size of the image, the contrast, the colors that you use, and that sort of thing. Okay. Continuing with color and graphics. Always make sure that whatever graphics you display are optimized so that it doesn't slow down the download time significantly. That relates to that 10-second rule for your opening page. Each graphic that you do use should have a clear purpose, that it should somehow complement or enhance the text. It's especially true though for us in design and in the arts, that you're going to be using a lot of graphics, okay? The other thing that people used to use are animated GIFs. I would limit the animated aspect of elements that you use. They can become a distraction. The same would be true for sound. If you do incorporate sound, make sure that the end user can turn off the sound when they're done. Okay. So that when you do use audio and video, make sure that you have, again, for ADA purposes, that you have closed captioning available. Again, make sure that the audio that you have, if you want sound in the background, does not distract from your website and can be easily turned off. Again, for accessibility, we talked about the captions. Download times for video can be significant, and the same for audio. So be careful if it's embedded in your website and on your pages. Don't need to do this too much anymore. Back in the day when Flash was an important tool for web design, it required a plugin in order to view Flash pages that you had created in Flash. And that's not so much the case anymore, okay? Make sure that in terms of fonts that you use, I would use common fonts. I would stay away from For text, I would stay away from serif typefaces. They tend to be a little bit hard to read when they're small. We've done this in our lessons as well with using unordered lists. The techniques for writing in web design is using bullet points, short, to the point paragraphs. You're not writing 5,000 to 10,000 word essays for your, on your websites. Use font sizes and colors consistently. That can be done very easily when you have set up your style sheet. Okay. And then make sure that your content is in an organized and in a consistent, meaningful manner so that it's easy for the person to view. Content presentation. You want to make sure that you have something that's easy to find, minimal number of clicks. I just mentioned that. You should be able to access any page on a website within 3 clicks. If you want, make sure that the copyright date is current on there. You want to make sure that your website does not include outdated material, especially if the content is important to the viewer. Make sure that your content is free of typographical and grammatical errors. That's the one thing that I like about web design, is that you can always go back and edit and change, and no one is the wiser. Because I notice for my weekly syllabus, among other things, that sometimes I will make mistakes. I told you I'm a poor typist and a poor proofreader. And sometimes I find those mistakes and I will go back as soon as I find them, or if they're pointed out to me, I will make the changes. Also, if there are other useful websites that provide or enhance the content of your website, then provide those to the user. But remember what I was saying early on about links to other pages. If they are absolute links or they're links to external websites, make sure that it opens up in a new window and on a blank screen so that the end user is not confused. They know that they're no longer on your website. That's important. Some just graphical things. Avoid the use of click here. It looks kind of clunky. For our small websites, visited versus non-visited status is not important, but when you're doing things, if you've noticed on your Google searches where pages it can be confusing what pages that you have seen and which ones you haven't, then maybe you do want to make sure that visited links are specified with different colors, okay? Again, alt text, again, national standards. What we have done here, we have WOW is working with what we were just talked about here. So that's going back to the W3C for all of your important information. And it really is where you need to go for everything. Okay, so here we go back here. So accessibility, that's what I clicked on. And then get resources for. And for us, if you're a content writer, that can be important. So they might recommend using, unordered lists or ordered lists. I clicked on the one for designers, okay? That's the one that we have here. So tips for getting started, designing for web accessibility. And that's what I clicked here. And that's where these links are. Okay, so that's pretty much all I have for you today. There are videos that I put up on Canvas. They're taken from lynda.com on taking your web design that you've developed in Photoshop and converting it to, in making it usable in Dreamweaver. But that requires that you know and understand Photoshop pretty well. So that's why I have not incorporated that into this class, because you have to just know a minimal amount of Photoshop in order to be successful with this class. So that's all I have for today. I will stop my recording, and that will be it for today, unless there's something else that you want me to add or discuss. Anything? No, we're all good. Okay, then I'm going to pause the recording, and I will say goodbye to most of you, and I will be around on Thursday. But when I am here on Thursday, we're not going to introduce any new information. It will be to help any of you troubleshoot some issues you may have, perhaps publishing or finalizing your websites. Okay, so that's it. So I'm going to say goodbye.